All sixes are equal, but some sixes are more equal than others. In this video, I'm going to give you an idea of why 3 plus 3 does not always equal 5 plus 1 in chess, or in other words, why a knight and a bishop are not necessarily the same thing as a rook and a pawn. I'll also be giving you a different point value for the pieces, so keep an eye out for that towards the end of the video. Let me tell you the story of what happens to a lot of chess players speaking from personal experience. You know the basic fundamentals of the opening, and you head into a chess game bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You meet your opponent's e4 with e5, they bring out their knight to attack your pawn, you play knight c6 to defend it, they develop their bishop, but they haven't defended their pawn on e4, so you go knight to f6, they defend their pawn with knight to g5, you go bishop c5 preparing to castle your king, and suddenly your entire world is shattered as they take your pawn on f7, forking the queen and rook, and defending the knight with their bishop. You go on to lose the game in a crushing defeat and vow to use the same opening the next time that you play white. So your next game you follow the exact same plan. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, your opponent switches it up a bit and plays bishop c5. Being the great player that you are, you notice that g5 is defended by the queen, so you play the quiet move, pawn to d3, defending the g5 square with your bishop from afar. Your poor, unsuspecting opponent just plays knight to f6, no idea what it's about to come to him, and you hop your knight to g5, rubbing your hands together in glee that you're about to go knight to f7, forking the queen and rook as your previous opponent did to you. Your opponent castles, taking the wind out of your sails temporarily because now your beautiful fork is gone, but then suddenly you realize that you're attacking the pawn with a far less valuable piece than the rook that's defending it. So excitedly you go knight to f7 thinking surely they can't take back because then they'll be losing a valuable piece. Or you might be a little bit calmer and calculate a bit and see that after they take you back and you take with the bishop and they take with their king, you end up having given up a knight and a bishop for a rook and a pawn, and you evaluate this as equal. If anything, surely you're winning in this position because their king is slightly unsafe. Why then does the engine tell us that we're completely lost in this position? In this specific game, one problem is that we're behind in development. We took out 2 pieces and soon traded them off, and as a result, our opponent now has 3 pieces developed while we have none. And another problem is our king's still in the center of the board. But there's a more general principle here. It's still close to the start of the game, and we gave away 2 pieces for 1 piece, because remember that a pawn is not a piece. So even though material count seems equal, we now have 1 less piece to help with any attacks that we want to launch. And we have 1 less piece to defend with. Another problem that we have is that our rook is more valuable than the opponent's knight or bishop on their own, and let's see why that can be problematic. In this position, don't worry too much about the entire position as a whole, but have a look and see that white is now the player which has a rook and a pawn, whereas black has a knight and a bishop, so material-wise, just in terms of the count, we're completely equal. Often what you're trying to do with your pieces is win material. And we can usually see if it's safe to win material by doing a quick count. If we focus on the pawn on e5, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 attackers, and our opponent black only has 1, 2, and 3 defenders. Usually, if we have 4 attackers and our opponent has 3 defenders, that means that it's safe for us to capture that piece. We start off by taking with our lowest value pieces, so let's say we take with the knight first. We've now taken a pawn with our knight, and they take it back, meaning that we need to recapture, else we've just given up a knight for a pawn. So we take back, they take us back, we take with our 3rd piece, they take with their 3rd piece, and after we've finally done all the exchanges, look at the material count now. You can see at the top it says +1, so black is now essentially a pawn up in terms of material, and this comes about because black has a bishop in exchange for 2 pawns. This happened because the thing that we were attacking with, the rook, was more valuable than the defenders, the knights, or the minor pieces. This is why it's often better to have the 2 minor pieces for a rook and a pawn in the middle game, because that's the time when both sides are maneuvering to win pieces or pawns. Extra lower value defenders and attackers can therefore be a huge advantage. It's important to know that a bishop and a knight versus a rook and pawn isn't always an advantage. As pieces get traded and we go into an endgame, it may be possible to tie the bishop and the knight to defending squares or defending pieces, and then just swing our rook across to the other side of the board, either to attack material or to go and help a pawn to advance. Often what you find ends up happening is the side which has the bishop and the knight has to give up one of these pieces in order to stop an advanced pawn. The key takeaway is that the value of pieces often depends on the position, and you should usually avoid giving up 2 minor pieces for a rook and a pawn when you're in the middle game or the opening. One way to try help you remember this is to give the bishop a value of 3.5 points. This will help you to remember that a knight and a bishop, for example, is worth more than a rook and a pawn, and it'll also make you think a little bit more carefully about giving up a bishop for a knight unnecessarily, although that's a topic for an entirely different video. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel to get more content like this. You also might be battling with the topic that's shown over here, so why don't you go and check out that video if you haven't watched it already. Thank you for watching, bye.